Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do a quick walk through the top 10 for the weekend. This is the weekend of February 23rd through today, the 25th. We will talk a little bit about the Oscar films and how they're doing since we're only about a week out from the Oscars. And then we'll do a little bit of a preview of what's coming out over the next couple of weeks. But let's start with what happened this weekend at the box office. The big story, of course, is Black Panther, right? I had a show last week where I talked about the preview numbers, the estimate numbers for Black Panther, and it was coming in at 192. Well, Disney was way off. They were $10 million off. The actual opening weekend for Black Panther was $202 million. The fourth biggest opening of all time. This was completely off the charts from what people were expecting. Remember when tracking started 3 weeks before Black Panther, we were looking at $100 million to $120 million for the opening weekend. So it bumped up. The actuals were $82 million over what tracking had suggested only a few weeks before. Outrageous, completely outrageous, and in some cases over $100 million more. And even before that tracking kicked in a few months ago, the expectation was $80 to $100 million opening weekend would be really good for this. The fact that it did 202, broke into the top 5 opening weekends of all time, really has blown everybody away. And I haven't seen anybody who has been able to really wrap their head around why it has done so well, and the significance of it doing so well, because there's so much that went into this movie and how they marketed it and how they approached this character, and what ended up on the screen and how it connected so well with everybody, and the fact that it did over $200 million its opening weekend really does change the ball game a bit, not just for MCU over the comic book movie genre in general. It does kind of change how we view the box office just in general overall from a sort of wide angle view. It is that important, this performance. It will change the business significantly over the next, few years, 5 years, 10 years. It will have an impact into how movies are made, produced, and released. And for Disney and for MCU, Black Panther has been a grand slam 10 times over, and there's no other way you can put that. There's nothing disappointing about this performance on any level. It has gone way beyond their wildest imagination in terms of success. It just has connected with audiences in a way that no one really could have predicted. And so in talking about the second weekend, it did so dramatically well its first weekend. And, even just thinking about the first couple of days it was out, it already was breaking records. It had the best Monday gross ever. It was President's Day weekend. Monday was President's Day, so a lot of people had that day off. It was the number one single Monday gross ever for Black Panther. It beat Force Awakens. Number one weekend in February ever. Number one weekend in winter ever. I guess they don't count December as winter. I guess winter here is like January through March, maybe. I don't know how they're counting that. It doesn't matter. Number one President's Day weekend, of course. And so it already had broken a ton of records by the time we got to this weekend. So the question that remained was, okay, we just had an historic performance. It was way outside the realm of expectation. The gut reaction to that was probably going to be, okay, wow, amazing. But, isn't this thing going to come back down to earth now? I mean, isn't this thing going to drop just a little bit in towards what we were expecting it to do? And that would have looked like, percentage-wise, in terms of the drop from the opening weekend to this weekend, that would have looked like a 55% drop, maybe a 60% drop, which would indicate, super levels of hype, very front-loaded movie. That didn't happen. It dropped only 46% this weekend to come in at the current estimate. And, this estimate could be low because last week they were off $10 million in their Sunday estimate. This weekend it did $108 million at the box office. Per theater average was almost $27,000 per theater. there's already, just in terms of new records that it has broken, it is the third fastest movie to get to $400 million total domestically. Its total take today is $400 million. So maybe Disney fudged it a bit so it didn't hit that $400 million mark. It is in company only with Jurassic World and The Force Awakens. Those are the only two other movies that have gotten to $400 million in 10 days or less. It's going to blow apart basically every movie in MCU. The real sort of question here is how far and high can it go? With this drop, a 46% drop on a second weekend to a huge hyped opening weekend, that's really, really good. And it suggests that the legs here are not going to collapse like they did for something like Ultron or Civil War, which both had sub 2.5x multipliers. That is, their total take domestically was 2.5x or lower their opening weekend. Multipliers is something we've talked about a lot. Normally for a film that does pretty well, you're looking at like 2.7 to 3x. Here with Black Panther, I think the expectation was that, okay, it's a big Marvel film. It seems very, very hyped, of course. So you're thinking, oh man, like maybe 2.5, 2.7 multiplier. But recently we have seen the sort of superhero genre multiplier rules go out the window, with Wonder Woman last year having an amazing summer run, and also Spider-Man, which did not open very high at 117, but Spider-Man Homecoming had these legs that kicked in at like weekend 4 that just didn't make any sense, and it was doing 30% drops there for a while. So the normal rules don't really seem to apply to these newer comic book movies, which are having higher multipliers than normal, 3x or higher in some cases. So if you're looking at Black Panther, if it does a 3x multiplier, you're looking at about $606 million total, maybe 610 in that area. Completely unheard of. Just totally not even in the realm of anybody's imagination a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Like, it just wasn't even considered in the Avengers realm in terms of total all-time take domestically. I mean, if we're gonna, it's worth looking into here. If it does break this $600 million line, it would be in the top 6, top 7 box office takes domestically ever. Now, of course, you got inflation involved, which is a whole different ballgame. But for all intents and purposes, it would be easily in the top 10. It will get into the top 10 here all time for the domestic box office. So no one has really, and I talked a little bit about this last week, why this happened, right? Why did Black Panther connect so well with so many different people? And I don't know if I have a good answer for it, right? I like to break down that analysis in two different buckets. Basically, it's marketing and the actual product itself, how you market the product and the product satisfaction, essentially. And if you look at the marketing quality, it seemed to be very good. The quantity was just massive. They just inundated people with different types of spots for this movie. They were in car commercials, YouTube pre-roll ads. It was really everywhere. And MCU knows how to do that sort of marketing very, very well for their tentpole blockbusters that they put out. So the quantity was there. The quality was good. It didn't really necessarily, I guess in my perspective, seem all that different from other comic book movie marketing. It did kind of fall in line to the normal MCU sort of style, their in-house style for their trailers and stuff. It didn't seem that outlandish, so I want to kind of call that a little bit of a push. So on the marketing side of things, it kind of seemed like it would open in the $120 million range, what tracking was saying. Definitely a very exciting, hyped film, but nothing to indicate that it would break into the top 5 of all time in terms of box office openings, but nothing to indicate that whatsoever. So you look on the other side of things, where Black Panther really sticks out 2 ways. One was the critics score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is well into the 90s. I think it was 97, 98 for a while. So critics loved this film. They absolutely loved it. And of course, MCU did a great job of getting that score out front so the audience could see it before the movie was even out. So it builds that hype factor, right? Oh my God, like 97% of Rotten Tomatoes. I was thinking about going to see it, but now that I know that critics love it, I've got to go see it, which is what I think happened with a ton of people for this movie. So you have the product quality, at least from the critics' perspective, was very high. And then when you got the first reactions, I'll call them the official reactions from CinemaScore, which does do in-person surveys when people see the film. They do the survey on Thursday and Friday, so it is a little bit skewed towards people who really wanted to see it. But you sort of take that into account when looking at the scores. It got an A+, right? Only the second superhero movie to do that outside of The Avengers, right? So this was a seriously well-made blockbuster film. Critics loved it. The audiences who saw it in the first couple of days absolutely loved it. And even looking at surveys from later on over the last couple of weeks, believe the positive score through ComScore, and they do their own in-person surveys, was well into the 90%. Like, I can't even, like 93, 94%, something like that. So the product quality was there, without a doubt. And the marketing overall, we'll say, was on the positive side. There's nothing in the marketing sort of strategy that they did that took away from the film. It did sort of seem like a traditional marketing campaign, nothing too crazy. So the product quality was great, decent to good marketing campaign. So where's the sort of abnormalness here? Where's the outlier that would suggest that this film was going to do that well? And the only thing I can kind of come up with is maybe the product development and conception here. Deciding to make a movie about this character and put it out right now does seem to be an integral part of why it is done so well. I think you have an African-American lead, that you haven't really seen that before on a tentpole film like this, at least in the MCU comic book world. Obviously, we've had movies with African-American protagonists that have done very well. I mean, look at someone like Will Smith, who's been an A-list movie star for the last 20 years. So just the fact that the lead is African-American is a big deal, but it's not necessarily that much of an outlier, but it is sort of new in the comic book world space, because we don't really have, outside of something like Blade 20 years ago or more, I guess now, there wasn't really an African-American lead in one of these massive comic book popcorn movies. So that was different. And I think the timing of it, with everything that has gone on over the last couple of years, and especially Trump being president, having this celebratory movie about not just an African-American actor, but just the African culture in general, which I think was an integral part of the film. It wasn't just, oh, hey, here's this African-American guy who's going to be just like every other superhero. No, it was tailored towards African culture specifically, which I think added so much to this film and made it such more interesting than a sort of boilerplate comic book movie. And MCU didn't really pull their punches on this. Bringing in Ryan Coogler as the director was a very bold move. He is a little bit of an auteur. He's an art director, essentially. He did Creed, but he really got his name from Fruitvale Station, which came out in 2013. This is about the shooting on the BART transit system in Oakland, California. He did a very good job with that. People loved that film, but it was definitely an art film. Only made $18 million total worldwide. And so Creed was sort of his calling card. Hey, I can do something a little bit more traditional on a bigger scale. And MCU is like, all right, let's give him Black Panther. So when I'm looking at all these different elements here of why this did so well, marketing to me didn't really seem like it was really pushing this into the abnormal top 5 range. Product quality itself, despite the fact that it was, received very well, critics loved it, that's not always something that's going to put it in the top 5. I look at something like Jurassic World, which I don't think is a great movie. I don't have the critic score off the top of my head or the audience score, but I wouldn't put it at like a 95%, right? Like, it just didn't really have that quality to it. But that, of course, made, millions upon millions of dollars, opened at 210 or something like that in the top 5, right? So it's not necessarily quality and like top tier quality that's going to push it over the edge. A lot of it does have to do with the product development and the timing of the release. And I think in this case, it was just the right exact movie at the right exact time from the right director and who had the right vision for it. Because it is a very celebratory movie. It isn't cynical necessarily at all. It is kind of a reprieve, I think, from what a lot of people are experiencing in their daily life when it comes to these topics on race and power and pride, right? And like how those things intermix and create such conflict. This is a movie that gives us, I think, a different perspective than what we're used to, and that's what people wanted. They wanted to see the world a different way, and this movie gave them that opportunity. And I think the big reason why it is doing so well. And that's a very high level read, of course. I haven't really backed it up with a ton of data. That's just my viewpoint of it. Because it didn't feel like the marketing was all that special. And the quality of the film, I'm sure that it's very good, but is it like Godfather good? Probably not. It's a very good popcorn tentpole movie, and it's very successful at doing that, but it's not necessarily like the top 10 films of all time artistically, and it's probably not going to be nominated for any Oscars, right? So it doesn't really have that quality to it. I think it was just the concept of the film and the visionary who who made it a reality. I think if this film was put into someone else's hands, I don't know that it would be this good. I don't think that it would connect with audiences the way that this has. That's sort of my take on Black Panther for now. We're going to see where it goes. Right now, I'm sort of predicting a high 500, low $600 million domestic take. Worldwide, it's going to at least hit $1 billion, maybe $1 billion, 1.1 billion, 1.2 billion, something in that range, which is everything about this was completely unexpected. Nobody thought it was going to happen, and it has happened. And I'm not sure how it's going to change the whole MCU universe. I think the Black Panther character is going to become obviously a much more integral role in the sort of overall scope of that cinematic universe. I'm sure the Disney people and the Marvel people are like, oh man, how can we get this guy more into Avengers and stuff like that now? A little late for that. I'm sure in the second Avengers movie that's coming out in 2019, he will play a much more prominent role. But I think MCU is going to shift a little bit towards Black Panther as, if not the central character of the universe, definitely in the top 3, right? You cannot ignore this performance as a one-off or something special in terms of just sort of saying, oh, it's a one and done thing. It's not one and done. No, Black Panther is going to be around for a long time. It's going to have a huge sequel, and it's going to play a very integral part in the MCU moving forward. And taking another step back, comic book movies just will not quit. They only seem to be making more and more money, and every few years we have another massive surprise like this, where Black Panther makes well over $100 more than it was tracking to do opening weekend, which is just, it is really hard to wrap your head around how this is happening, why it's happening, but it is happening. And, look for more comic book movies to get greenlit because of this. I expect stuff like Gambit to come out, and like the smaller characters, one-off characters, now they have a really, really strong platform. And now someone can sit down in a meeting and say, well, look at what happened with Black Panther. It wasn't a character that outside the comic book world, a lot of people were that familiar with. But he was able to open a movie in $202 million opening weekend. So it's an easy argument to make for smaller characters that aren't so wide known to have their own films. Something like a Gambit. I'm really pushing for the Gambit movie with Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. I always, for some reason, I can never remember his name. In any event, okay, so Black Panther, number 1, $108 million is the current estimate for the second weekend. 46% drop, $27,000 per theater. Fantastic, amazing, wonderful, game-changing. I mean, that's the only words you can really describe that. Number 2 this weekend was Game Night, a brand new rated R comedy from Warner Brothers, starring Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams, along with a lot of other people. took in $16.6 million for the weekend, which was okay. It was kind of in the middle of tracking. Tracking was saying about 13 to 21. It was a pretty big range for this movie. I was thinking that, success for this would have been 20. If you could get to 20 and the critics liked it, Rotten Tomato score was in the 80s, I believe, I think higher 80s. So critics liked it. The quality seems to be there. You would hope it would hit 20 and then have a good 3-4x multiplier. Maybe somehow legs it to 80 to $90 million would be like the rosy scenario for this. It didn't hit the 20, hit 16.6. Per theater average was $4,700 per theater. It did open on only about 3,500 theaters. So where's this going to go? What's the story on this? It's a decent opening for a rated R comedy. The legs are probably going to be very good for this. I would imagine at least a 3x multiplier, maybe even a 4x, because it was a little bit depressed because of the Black Panther massive second weekend. At 16.6 times 3, you're looking at $50 million as like the low end of what this is going to do. I think because critics liked it so much and it was depressed because of this weekend, I would point a little bit more towards a 4x multiplier, which will put it at like 66. I would shoot for something like $65 million is where this thing is going to close out. It did cost $37 million to make, which is kind of expensive, I guess, for a rated R comedy. But this is one of the first rated R comedies that is just kind of performing pretty good. It wasn't a breakout like Girls Trip last year, and it wasn't a huge flop like most rated R comedies last year. I'm looking at you, Baywatch, Fist Fight, Rough Night, Snatched. I could go on and on. So maybe this is a little bit of a rebound for the rated R comedy genre. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. If it does play 4x, maybe even 5x, that signals to me that like, okay, like rated R comedies are back on the menu. But if it kind of peters out here as a 2.5x multiplier or something like that, it's sort of the rated R comedy are sort of in the doghouse still. They haven't really come out. So Game Night, pretty good performance. Number 3 was Peter Rabbit with a great 28% drop from last weekend, $12.5 million. Total take so far is $71.3 million for Peter Rabbit. That's a pretty good performance. Production budget was $50 million. I'm thinking that Peter Rabbit's going to play strong all the way through Easter, which is over a month away. So maybe it was really good timing for this release to have it be on a low simmer all through March. But obviously going to blast through $100 million, it looks like, especially if he keeps dropping this low. But we'll see that one goes over the next few weeks. Number 4 was Annihilation, a brand new film, hardcore sci-fi / horror film by Eric Scarlin. Tessa Thompson's in it, who is wonderful. Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Oscar Isaac, Gina Rodriguez. This is a tough one. Leading up to this, it was hard to read. Like, the trailers are coming down. There's a lot of hype, especially on places like Reddit where nerds hang out. So from the sci-fi angle, it looked like it was going to be a pretty strong film. It did choose an odd weekend to open. The weekend after Black Panther, I think everybody knew it was going to do pretty well. So opening the weekend after, it doesn't look that great in hindsight now. It only did $11 million this weekend, which is not good for a film like this. Per theater was just about $5,500 per theater, which is actually higher than Game Night. The reason for that is Paramount decided to only open this on 2,000 theaters. Now, this is where it doesn't make any sense to me. You have this $40 million sci-fi movie with a couple of big stars in it, from a really cool, hip new director. Paramount, I don't know what they're thinking when they push it out in 2,000 theaters. That's almost like a limited wide release. You need to have well over 2,000 theaters to really push this and get the numbers that you want. I just don't know what they were thinking here. Maybe they were thinking it was like a low, a low simmer, open it on 2,000, have a really high per theater average, and then keep that going for a couple of months. That's not the way movies work these days, unless you're like an art movie. And Annihilation's not an art movie. It was supposed to be a big budget sci-fi sort of splash, and it's not that. And I think there's some other sort of harbingers of a poor performance here overall. The cinema score is a C, which is really, really bad. Again, cinema score, it's the audience that goes Thursday and Friday. The people really wanted to see this. And getting a C is essentially a failing grade. Anything below B- is failing. And I just don't know what happened here. You know, Paramount has had some real trouble with giving a lot of leeway to visionary directors. Darren Aronofsky, of course, with Mother this last October is another perfect example, which had a cinema score of F and completely failed at the box office. Annihilation is not in that realm, but it's kind of in a similar sphere of like failure. Now, Paramount knew this movie wasn't going to do great because they sold the international distribution rights to Netflix. So in about 2 weeks, Annihilation's going to premiere internationally on Netflix, which is just another really stupid idea. I'm sure they're going to recoup their money. I think they got about $55 million for that deal. But you're cheapening the movie. The moment that goes up on Netflix, and the same thing happened with Hitman's Bodyguard, the moment Annihilation hits Netflix, it will be on every illegal streaming service in 1080p HD. And there goes your legs in America, because like it's totally easy to access. Everybody knows how to do it these days. And if they want to see it and don't have Movie Pass, they're certainly not going to go and pay $15 or $20 to go see this, right? I don't know. I just think it was a really botched release by Paramount. They're in such trouble these days. I don't see them lasting very long. I think they're going to get bought in the next year or so, or just go out of business. I mean, they just don't know what they're doing. They have a lot of losses. And this sort of release with Annihilation just sort of is kind of one of the nails in their coffin. They don't know what they're doing over there right now, unfortunately, or they just have some misguided leadership. But Total Take so far, Total Take overall, $11 million for Annihilation. I don't think it's going to have some great legs. Total Take, maybe $30 million, maybe a little bit higher than that, which is pretty atrocious for a film like this. So number 4 was Annihilation, not a great performance at all. Number 5 was 50 Shades Free, $6.9 million, a pretty hefty 60% drop, lost 500 theaters. Per theater average is approaching the Mendoza line of 2,000. It was sitting just above that at $2,100 per theater. Total Take so far, $89 million for 50 Shades Free. An okay performance, didn't flop, didn't break out, kind of I think what Universal expected for the last movie in this series. Number 6 was Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle, the movie that will not die, $5.6 million, another incredible 29% drop. Again, like I say every week when I talk about Jumanji, someone needs to write a dissertation on this. What the hell happened? Like, why is this doing so well? Why am I still talking about this movie 10 weeks after it came out and it's still doing $5-6 million every weekend, still dropping only 29%? I mean, it's absurd. Lost 280 theaters. Per theater average is $2,200. Not too bad. Total Take so far on Jumanji, $387 million, approaching that $400 million mark. Which if you told anybody that Jumanji was going to make $400 million 6 months ago, they probably would have had you committed in an insane asylum. That's the story on Jumanji. Number 7, the 1517 to Paris, the Clint Eastwood sort of docudrama about the terrorist attack and the group of people that stopped it on a French train. From Warner Brothers, $3.6 million, 52% drop. Lost 290 theaters. Per theater average is terrible at $1,300, and only its third weekend. Not a great performance for this film. $32.3 million so far. Definitely a middling performance at best. Not really a flop because the budget was so low. I think Clint Eastwood's actually really good at keeping those budgets down. But not a good performance at all, and not really, kind of unexpected, to be honest with you. I thought this movie was going to do a little bit better just because Clint Eastwood. I look at something like Sully. Sully is on pay cable constantly, and I always watch it when it's on. It's not a good film. Like, there's nothing really that cinematic about it. It has the mixture of a Lifetime channel or like Discovery Channel docudrama is what it is. And but at the same time, there is something very entertaining about it. And I think Clint Eastwood is great at doing stuff like that. He makes his movies very engaging. And I think that's mostly from the story perspective and the character perspective. The actual movies themselves are not great on a technical level. But I just thought 15 to 17 to Paris would do a lot better than this. I would expect at least 50. I would expect probably like $100 million out of this movie if Warner Brothers, and it's lucky if it gets half the way there, which it won't. Number 8 was The Greatest Showman from Fox, still going just like Jumanji. 32% drop with $3.4 million for this weekend. Lost about 335 theaters. Per theater average is still above the Mendoza line at $2,100. Total take so far for The Greatest Showman, $160 million. Don't forget this thing opened at 8.5 million, I believe, its opening weekend, and just has not quit over the last 10 weeks. Number 9 was Every Day from Orion. I didn't know Orion is like this old distribution company that I remember from the 80s as a kid. I didn't know. Now I'm like really interested as to what their story is. I guess so that's what happened. Like I was just so confused seeing that name. So Orion stopped distributing films in 1997, which sort of lines up from my memory. They started again in 2016, have not had anything really do that well. Some really small films. We're talking films that make under 100K total at the box office. This is their first real big release, which is why I think it jumped out at me. It's like, wow, it's made this movie Every Day, YA novel adaptation. I think it's about a girl who dates a new guy every day, or the person she loved takes on a new body every day, something like that. Did 3.1 million. It's the biggest release from the relaunched Orion distribution company. Not a good performance. I mean, it's a smaller release, about 1,700 theaters, but the per theater average was below 2,000. It's already starting out below that sort of mark of a wide release, doing well. That's shit. That's shitty. And I don't know what their plan is. I don't know what they were thinking. I never even heard of this film until I read about the box office recaps for this weekend. I don't know. Totally confused as to what's going on there. We'll see. I mean, the budget was only 4.9 million, so you can't knock it that much. But at the same time, they had to market it, right? Which is it'll cost you at least for even a tiny film like this, 10, 20 million bucks just domestically. So who knows? Who knows what's going on there? Number 10 was Early Man, which was, I guess, an animated film, which I don't know nothing about. $1.7 million, 46% drop. Really not much to talk about there. Ooh, horrific per theater average, though. Wasn't about 2,500 theaters this weekend. $682 per theater. Ouch. In its second weekend. Whoa. That one's going to lose most, if not all of its theaters next weekend. What an awful performance. Okay, so that's the top 10. The big things to take away. Jumanji and The Greatest Showman are still having very low drops. They will not go away or die. They should be hitting home entertainment platforms really soon. Like 10 weeks, they usually hit at the 12-week mark is where home entertainment comes in, and that would be DVD, digital copy, EST, electric sell-through as they call it in the biz, and rental VOD, so you can enjoy it at your home. I'm not sure how they're going to handle that. If the movies are doing still so well in the movie theater, I would push out the home entertainment if I were them. But they're going to be stupid, and they're not going to, and they're going to release the DVD in like a week, and then the box office is just going to disappear. I mean, what a dumb move, but that's what's going to happen. You know it. So those movies are still sticking around, those holiday sort of, sort of marathon runners. And then Annihilation did very poorly. Game Night did okay. Might signal the comeback of rated R comedies if it has really good legs. But of course, the story of the weekend is Black Panther's massive second weekend with $108 million total. Let's quickly talk about what's going on here with these Oscar films. Three Billboards was 11 this week, did 1.2 million. Per theater average is okay, it's $1,700 per theater. It's under 1,000 theaters now. Total take so far $50 million. The Post total take so far $78 million. Shape of Water was at 55. What else is out there? Lady Bird is at 47. Phantom Thread's only at 18.7. I, Tonya is at $28 million so far. So just based on that, the Post, is doing the best. Three Billboards is doing pretty well. Shape of Water is finally getting in the realm where it should be in that $55 million range. It's just adding about $1 million per each weekend now. I don't know about Shape of Water. There was such a weird, and there has been such a weird reaction to that film. I felt like they should have just blasted it out in 4,000 theaters, or like 3,500, I mean, somewhere around Christmas, and I think it would have done a lot better than it's doing now. Maybe even reach the $100 million mark, because it does have a sort of water cooler feel to it. It is such an interesting movie to watch. I did not really enjoy it all that much, but it was super fascinating and interesting to watch. And I think that would have responded well in just general mass culture, getting people to go see it, because it's just something so odd and interesting to see. Call Me by Your Name's only at 15.7 million. Kind of in line with like the Phantom Thread level. So I think, right now what you're looking like in terms of the Oscars, not the box office has a direct effect, but it does have some effect. I think when I'm looking at these numbers, again, the Post may pull off a Best Pick win because it has done the best, but I think artistically, Three Billboards and Lady Bird kind of have that mixture of critics really love them and they did pretty well at the box office. The Post kind of seemed pretty boring to me, and I think the general audience reaction was somewhat muted. Lady Bird and Three Billboards, not the case. I think audiences and critics really love them alike. I mean, I hate Three Billboards, but that's just me. I'm a weirdo. My guess right now for Best Picture, based on what I'm seeing here, I think it's going to be Three Billboards, probably. Maybe Shape of Water. Shape of Water has done 55. The problem with Shape of Water is that it feels like a $100 million budget movie, but it wasn't. It was shot for like $40 million, which blows my mind when you see it. You're going to watch this and be like, oh my God, this must have cost like $150 million. But no, it cost next to nothing. Guillermo del Toro is just a master filmmaker. So maybe Shape of Water, because it has hit that $50 million mark, will do okay. Maybe it's a chance to win the Best Picture. My gut says right now Lady Bird's going to win. Another year for A24, upset. It just has that cultural cachet, that good performance at the box office for what it was, an art film. And I don't know, first time director. It just has this sort of like vivaciousness to it that Three Billboards, The Post, and Shape of Water just don't. Shape of Water might win because it's so clearly the work of a master director. And I think the people, especially the voters in the Academy, are going to watch that movie just be like, their jaw's going to hit the floor at the technical expertise of that film. So maybe that puts it over the top. But right now, my money's on Lady Bird. Okay, so that's top 10. That's sort of a little bit a brief talking about, or a very brief analysis about the Oscar films. Let's take a look at and see what's coming out over the next couple of weeks here. This is an interesting weekend. We have two movies. Death Wish, which is a remake with Bruce Willis. If you're under 30, you probably don't remember the first Death Wish series of films. It was a really big series of films with Charles Bronson. It's just basically a vigilante. A guy takes the law into his own hands, kills bad guys, blah, 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 blah. Right now, there's so much, like, with Bruce Willis, like, shooting a black guy. It just, I don't know. It feels like a really weird political environment to put out this movie. I also believe it's directed by Eli Roth, who is not known for his subtlety. So we'll see how that does. I think it's going to do okay. The buzz on this movie just completely died, though, I'll have to say. And, I don't know, because it was supposed to come out, I believe, later last year, or maybe even earlier this year in January, something like that. There was a lot of buzz when the trailer dropped, but now it's just completely dissipated. I had no idea it was coming out this weekend. We're only like 4 days from release, and there's like no pulse on this film whatsoever. So I think they really lost the opportunity to put it out 6 months ago or whenever it was, 3 months ago. So that one's coming out. Also coming out is Red Sparrow. This is the Russian spy thriller with Jennifer Lawrence in the lead, Joel Edgerton, directed by Francis Lawrence. I don't know what else. Okay, that they also did the Hunger Games movies. That's why I wasn't really that familiar with them. It's a long movie, 2 hours, 19 minutes. Rate hard R, I imagine. Jennifer Lawrence basically plays a honeypot, which is a spy term, I guess, for a very beautiful, sexy woman who gets men entangled in certain things through their sexuality, and gets them to give up secrets, gets them to become a spy, or spies on them, stuff like that. So it should be a really interesting movie. Response so far critically has not been great. So I think, in terms of box office, it's going to be somewhat muted. I think it's going to do better than Death Wish, but I don't think it's going to break out. Nothing really on the limited side worth mentioning. That's, Friday is March 2nd, so we're already in March here. Then March 9th, we have a bigger weekend. The Wrinkle in Time from Disney should be pretty big. The Hurricane Heist, I'm not familiar with this movie. Entertainment Studios, who's pretty much brand new, putting out some smaller films. We'll see how that one does. Gringo from SDX Entertainment. I'm not sure how that one's going to do either. Strangers sequel, Strangers Pray at Night. That weekend's kind of a push. It's all going to be owned by Wrinkle in Time, without a doubt, right? That would be my guess there. And then, God, March is a weird month. It starts out sort of slowish. Red Sparrow, Wrinkle in Time are probably the biggest two in the first 2 weekends. Then we have Tomb Raider come out on the 16th. Love, Simon, I'm not sure what that one is. That one's not going to be big at all. And then we really hit, I guess the Easter season. You have Sherlock Gnomes coming out. You have Pacific Rim Uprising, the sequel. What else? You have Paul, Apostle of Christ. What is this, like oh my God, another religious movie. Unsane from Bleecker Street. That looks really interesting. And then you kind of hit the Easter holiday, and Ready Player One comes out on March 28th. So a really odd March. Looking back early this year at March, I thought March was going to be massive, but honestly, the buzz for Death Wish and Red Sparrow just is not there. A Wrinkle in Time is supposed to be huge, but I'm not so sure now. Tomb Raider is kind of like, I don't know, up in the air how well it's going to do. There was a lot of negative response to the trailers that were coming out, like, oh, not another video game movie, and the last ones were terrible, all that kind of stuff. I get the feeling that Tomb Raider is going to do a lot better than people are thinking. I could be totally wrong. I could be just an old dinosaur who's totally out of touch with younger people. I do think Tomb Raider is going to do okay. And then kind of a massive end to March. Honestly, the most exciting movie coming out in March to me is definitely going to be Ready Player One right at the end. No idea how it's going to do. People are really itching for a good sci-fi these days. Annihilation's a failure. Mute on Netflix is a massive failure. Blade Runner 2049 was a failure. The new Netflix series Altered Carbon, well, I watched the entire thing and really enjoyed it. Not exactly top tier sci-fi writing overall, right? So maybe Ready Player One can be the savior for sci-fi this spring. But yeah, so it should be a really fascinating March. I don't really know how it's going to play out. I feel like everybody's just going to keep seeing Black Panther to me for the next month, is what it seems like. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Have a good one.